Welcome to episode 125 of TV's Top 5, the Hollywood Reporter's TV podcast. I'm Leslie Goldberg, West Coast TV editor, and I'm joined as usual by my friend, co-host, and THR's chief TV critic, Dan Feinberg. Hi, Dan. How was your birthday?
My birthday was largely being in Santa Barbara with my mom as she was going through knee surgery. So Misha Beirach to my mom, but also to all who are ailing. But anyway, hopefully she is getting better, and so that is where I am. That is what I am doing, and that is if I sound or look weird today. Not that anyone is looking at me. That's what up.
Well, I send all my love to Mama Feinberg, Dan, and hope that she has a speedy recovery.
Me too.
But it's been a busy week. Lots of big conversations. You got The Handmaid's Tale wrapping its season, and In the Heights, man, the dialogue around the movie has exploded into discussions about colorism. It's one of those things where when examples of representation are so limited, it becomes incumbent upon things that are in the conversation to suddenly be the entire conversation, and that's, it's not inherently fair to In the Heights that it has to be the only representation of a thing. And yeah, I think a lot more of this will come up in today's showrunner spotlight interview with Rafael Casal of Blindspotting, and I think really and truly his answer to this question, which people should listen to, is better than anything that either one of us can say. So absolutely. Well, that's coming up as usual in our fourth segment. But before we get there, let's dive in with headlines.
So if you've been deeply into all of the ongoing discussion of UFOs and how seriously we're suddenly taking those discussions, which, I guess is probably good, probably what our alien overlords would want. Anyway, J.J. Abrams is producing a UFO documentary series for Showtime. Showtime has also handed out a series order to the long-gestating American Gigolo update starring John Bernthal.
In other new series orders, Disney Plus has officially greenlit a limited musical based around Beauty and the Beast. It's a prequel series starring Luke Evans and Josh Gad reprising their roles, with newcomer Brianna Middleton set to play LeFou's stepsister Tilly.
Speaking of IP, and it does feel as if that's sometimes all we do, former TV's Top 5 guest and a Black Lady sketch show Emmy nominee Robin Thede will write and star in an update of the ABC comedy Perfect Strangers, which will also co-star London Hughes, and it will be set up for HBO Max. My read on this one is, I would like to watch a TV show starring Robin Thede and London Hughes, and if the only way to make that TV show exist is to call it Perfect Strangers, I guess I can deal with that.
And in 5-star renewal news, Girls 5 Eva will be back for a second season on Peacock. Freeform and Hulu breakout Cruel Summer will also be back for a sophomore run, while Apple continues to hand out early pickups, this time with a third season order for Jason Momoa drama C. And you should definitely go back and listen to our interview with Girls 5 Eva showrunner Meredith Scardino in episode 119 from May, where she talks all about the musical comedy and her hopes for season 2 and maybe some familiar boy band and girl band faces.
And in the overall deals space, Monica Lewinsky will create and develop TV projects for the American Crime Story impeachment producers at 20th Century Television. She's apparently very, very hands-on on American Crime Story impeachment, and also she's really smart and a really good writer. So I am all for this as a second or possibly third act in Monica Lewinsky's American life. Good on her.
Well, with all that out of the way, let's dive into this week's Top 5.
Number 1.
Leading off, Disney is moving away from Friday premieres after Loki, which about last Wednesday, became its most watched series debut, whatever the bleep that means. The move affects only TV series, which will now bow on Wednesdays, with feature films remaining on Fridays. Leslie, break down the rationale and rationalization surrounding this change.
There's not a whole lot of details. Disney Plus has not put out any kind of public statement on this, but this entire move is totally fascinating to me because it's showing that Disney is saying, we've got so much content coming. We're going to separate TV and film. Film will be the event on Friday, which is normally the big box office draw. We're going to move the TV series up earlier in the week, so you have less competition within the streamer for eyeballs on a specific day of the week. And then in the larger streaming landscape, Hulu, which is, again, we say this all the time, owned by Disney now, has tended to bow a lot of its originals on Wednesdays. See The Handmaid's Tale. And Fridays with the upcoming 9 Perfect Strangers. HBO Max, Peacock, and Paramount Plus largely stick to Thursdays. Netflix has obviously set up its, stake its claim to Fridays long ago, and they've more recently been experimenting with Sundays. You heard Alan Yang talk about Master of None premiering on a Sunday, which he called the day for prestige shows to launch on the streamer. The Crown previously launched on a Sunday on Netflix. So it's interesting. I think what we're seeing is what we're starting to see is a streaming schedule emerge, which nobody ever said, how much do time slots matter on broadcast or on linear? Well, time slots apparently matter on streaming now.
And I think that's where this becomes funny because the whole point of scheduling things back in the old days was that things were sort of locked into a position, but that you allowed viewers to find things and you allowed viewers to establish rituals. And the initial thing that Netflix did was, we're not in favor of establishing rituals. We let everyone do whatever they want while still releasing streaming things primarily on Friday in a very ritualistic fashion. And
right, but then you have the entire weekend to watch all episodes of whatever is dropped.
And I think it's, I think to general convenience, Friday seems like a very valid place to launch things if you want people to be able to watch them over the weekend. But there's also no reason why it shouldn't be the same if you launch things on Thursday. So I don't feel like the Peacock or HBO Max way of doing it on Thursday is necessarily wrong. I think that the thing about Disney Plus is they don't have many shows, but the shows they have do, and we've discussed this before, tend to be kind of more appointment viewing. And that is one of the strengths that they've built in, is that they know that people will want to watch Loki its first day. They'll want to watch WandaVision its first day. So they're kind of imposing, you're going to watch this on Wednesday. And that's, that's a little bit more structured than just if HBO Max releases anything on a Thursday and it's not a hugely hyped thing, and the entire point is, well, we're perfectly okay if you happen to simply discover this on Friday, discover it on Saturday, discover it a week later. So something like Starstruck, which premiered last week and premiered without sort of the big rollout of reviews. We didn't get to it. There was simply too much TV, but people were talking about it, and enough people I respected said it was a good and likable show. And I watched it in, 3 hours flat, basically. It's about as fast and easy a binge as you could find, and I like things like that. So they know that it doesn't need to be a show everyone tunes into on the first day. It can be gradual. So everyone, again, has their different methodologies, and I'm okay with people spacing things out. It makes my life less insane if some things are coming out Wednesday, some things are coming out Thursday, some things are coming out Friday. It's almost as if having time slots is beneficial for people's schedules. So sure, streamers, institute time slots. Go for it.
Yeah, the other thing too is, Netflix is still the binge model, right? Most of the drops, and I'm not saying all, because, everyone has experimented with full seasons, et cetera, versus weekly episodes or 3 episodes to premiere, et cetera. But Disney Plus is largely a weekly rollout, right? Hulu, the same thing. Obviously some seasons are a binge model, et cetera. But to me, it's like, they're recognizing that people are turning to streaming every single night of the week. And if you offer something new on a Wednesday, you're going to get you're going to get eyeballs, especially if it's Marvel or Star Wars. And you're basically saying, well, now you're competing directly with broadcast, right? Like, most people were going to say, like, oh, we'll watch broadcast during the week, and then something new on streaming will come out on the weekends, and that's what you're looking for. But now, to me, I see it as a direct competitor. Like, okay, so you've got new episodes of of a Marvel show every Wednesday. Well, what happens when the broadcast season comes back and you've got some big new premiere on a Wednesday night? Like, which one are you going to watch? And I mean, yeah, of course, there's still the actual time slot, right? So you're going to watch something at 8 p.m. versus waiting until midnight to watch when Loki drops, which is crazy to me. Like, I've stayed up at, late until all hours of the night to watch some of this stuff. And it's fascinating to me because, how soon until they actually have, okay, we're going to move this up and now it's going to launch in prime time, because that's, I think, where we're headed.
Oh, it's absolutely. Or again, it comes down to, and we've talked about this over and over again, so could be repeating stuff. It comes down to nothing should be set in stone. And I don't think it should be set in stone that everything on Netflix is binge. I don't think anything should be set in stone. People should feel like they're willing to adapt and like they're willing to be flexible and all of that. So you had our colleague and friend of the Five, Joe Adalian, who was very annoyed that HBO Max with the Friends reunion didn't attempt to stunt something and actually have it premiere on Thursday at 8 p.m. because that is the time slot people associate with Friends. And on one hand, I think that's silly because I don't know that the audience that they were going for is really like, I would be much more likely to watch this because I enjoy the nostalgia. But on the other hand, why not fiddle with things? I don't know that it's better or worse for anything. It's just, let's fiddle. And so there was sort of a lot of rigidity to the way that streamers initially were handling things because they didn't know how much flexibility there was, despite flexibility being everything with binging. They just didn't know if audiences would follow ... to ... night and if they'd binge it immediately and how they would watch it. Well, at this point, we don't have the data on that. And we might have mentioned once or twice that there are no ratings for any of these services, and that's a problem. But they have the data. They know how many people are watching what at 12 p.m. Disney Plus could tell you what percentage of the Loki audience is staying up till midnight on Tuesday into Wednesday to watch. They won't.
I'd imagine it's a vast part.
I imagine it's significant. But I'm not sure if it's vast. I don't know if we would discover that is really only 1% of the audience, less than 1% of the audience, or if it actually is a huge audience, because movies have been doing this for the better part of a decade, the sort of the midnight screenings on the day before and how big those numbers can be. And even those things, the midnight screening on the Thursday into the Friday has become let's open a movie at 8 p.m. on the Thursday into the Friday. Everyone is trying to adapt the process. Everyone is trying to put things out there in as many different ways as possible. And they're only doing it because they have an awareness of how viewer habits work. We say this over and over again, and it continues to be my feeling about everything. Nobody is doing anything out of convenience to the audience. They are doing it because they have evidence that the audience will follow them. And so everyone is being led around by the nose. This is where Disney wants you to stop with the nose leading, but sure, why not?
And look, in a larger sense, this was done because Disney Plus is ramping up content. They're going to have so many more original series. They're going to have more original movies. And if you're separating the launches, that's also separating some marketing funds, right? So you can hit something hard on a Wednesday, you can hit it again on a Friday, etc. So interesting as the streaming wars escalate to see if any of these other streamers will kind of come out and say, this is our launch day or this is our launch time. Or if Netflix will come out and say, this is what we're going to do. Like our prestige shows officially bow on Sundays, like, unscripted will bow during the week and broad skewing, scripted originals will remain on Friday, and features on Friday, it's all evolving. And I think this will be a conversation that we'll have much more in the years to come.
We promise. We'll talk about this again.
Yeah. Years to come. See what I did there? I just renewed us for like 17 more years.
How nice. I didn't know you had that power.
I don't.
Oh, okay. Moving along.
Number 2.
Our second topic this week is another thing that we've been talking about fairly frequently. Basically, kids, we might be TV's top 5, but let's be real. There are like 2 topics, and we just sort of spin them off in different ways. 3 topics, 4. There aren't more than 4 topics. Anyway, we are once again talking about bubble shows and the ripples coming off of upfronts a couple weeks ago. Last week, we dedicated a full segment to, unfortunately, the cancellation of Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. So this week, we're going to look a little bit bigger picture. Leslie, where do we stand on things that still do or do not exist in or on the bubble?
Well, the Bubble Watch update is now down to one. The last show awaiting word on its future on the broadcast networks is Good Girls, because this came down this week that NBC had canceled Manifest after 3 seasons. The series was a co-production between Warner Brothers and Universal, with producers planning to shop the drama. And one of the things that we pointed out during last week's segment about Zoe's was the fact that co-productions can make that a little bit harder to do. And yes, the show is partially owned by NBC's parent company, and you've got an indie studio like Warner Brothers now that's going to shop the show. It's now, since then it has shot to number 1 on Netflix, whatever that metric is worth. But, the co-pros can limit and make it more complicated to find a show a new home. And, when I spoke with the studio chiefs in late May after the upfronts, every single one of them mentioned multiple pilots and canceled series that were trying to find new homes. Among them, Rebel, For Life, All Rise, and Prodigal Son, though the latter appears officially DOA. And, checking in with Good Girls, that's fully owned by Universal Television. And more importantly, before the show even premiered, the studio signed a lucrative first-run global distribution deal with Netflix, meaning Netflix came in as a co-financer. They don't own it, but they're co-financing it, and those funds help them afford a top level cast. It was a financial incentive that helped NBC greenlight the show and pick it up to series. And at the same time, it also kind of caps its ability to generate additional revenue from other international sales, because Netflix took it literally everywhere. So that's also why it's probably, of all the bubble shows, the most likely to wind up being saved by Netflix and get a 5th season as an exclusive on Netflix after, with NBC likely cutting ties from the series. So it's super interesting to follow, basically everything is interesting in the industry right now, because these deals are changing. And, when you look at a deal like this that was made 4 years ago, it was super smart, right? Like, Sci-Fi did the same thing for that George R.R. Martin show, Night Flyers, right? And then you're like, oh, great, we're going to make this big, expensive show, and Netflix is co-financing it, and we gave away our global rights, but we got all this money, and they're going to make it. And then it bombed on linear, and then they canceled it after 1 season because they couldn't sell it. There was no additional revenue coming in because they had gave it all away to Netflix. And now you're starting to look and say, well, do those deals make sense anymore? So it's crazy. This is how fast our industry is changing, because 3 years ago, this deal became a new model for success. And this was a deal that was orchestrated by Bella at Netflix. And, she's obviously now running the show. So it shows you how smart some of those moves that she's done have been for the streamer. But we go back to the traditional broadcast system and the studio system, that may not have been a great move. Because maybe it limited how much they were able to get for the show. And, this is the only revenue stream. That's it. Linear. And then it bombs on linear, even though it's a critical darling, but it's a huge performer on streamer. But now with Netflix as your co-financer, it means it's going to limit your ability to move that to Peacock. So as these deals that were done just a few years ago were considered ahead of their time and a way to make shows going forward while limiting risk, it's also now kind of coming back to bite these studios in the ass as they kind of look to, for new life. And I think that's probably, as I discussed last week, a big part of the reason that a show like Zoe's is what didn't get to go to Peacock.
I'm finding the Manifest #1 show on Netflix thing to be an interesting narrative, only because of how little it means. Because Netflix also had multiple weeks where Jupiter's Legacy was the #1 show on Netflix, even after Netflix had canceled Jupiter's Legacy. So I think that using this was the #1 show on Netflix, which several producers on Manifest did, This very clearly does not mean to Netflix what you want it to mean, because Netflix knows what it means and you don't know what it means. Netflix.
It's people watching at least 2 minutes. So if something auto plays, does that count? If people watch 20 minutes of it and turn it off because it's terrible or they don't like it or they get busy or they never come back to it, like that doesn't define success. At the same time that Nielsen is measuring streaming minutes, and Jupiter's Legacy led the Nielsen chart for 2 weeks.
Yep.
So, and again, the only people who really know how well something is doing and how shitty something is doing are these specific streamers. And how soon, I mean, I feel another tirade coming on here, but give us the data. Just tell us. Let us know how many people are watching or how few people are watching. The broadcast networks do it. We know how shitty a show does on linear. We know no one's watching on linear. We know people find shows in their own time, even if you've got a Wednesday premiere date, unless it's like some big grand event. Give us the data. Just give it to us. It's like we're fishing in a lake where we don't know if there's any fish. If it's the lake or a pool.
And again, the thing that they will say is that, again, these are not ad supported, so it's just not monetized in that way and whatever. It still is infuriating, to go back to In the Heights. The ongoing narrative in the past less than a week has been heavily focused on the quote unquote disappointment or failure of In the Heights. At the box office. And to me, it's just such a ridiculous argument, because it positions the reason why Warner Brothers put these movies on HBO Max as being, if not an accident, as being something entirely only COVID dependent, as opposed to the reality, which is they put the movies on the streaming service because they knew the streaming service needed help. They knew that the streaming service needed a boost. It needed a reason for people to be staying with the service, to be subscribing. So pretending that the only thing that matters to In the Heights is its domestic box office because this Warner Brothers HBO Max deal was just a bad thing, whatever, that had no meaning, that wasn't a success. No, that's ridiculous. They put these movies on the streaming service because streaming is the future, and they had to make sure that this streaming service that didn't have a very good launch had legs. So if you watched it on HBO Max, no matter what anyone tries to tell you, it was not the same as you bootlegging this movie. You were helping the movie serve a purpose to its corporate overlords, which is all that going to see at the box office does as well. The problem, though, to me, becomes Warner Brothers is never going to tell us which of the goals they had for any of these movies In the Heights succeeded at. And so what you lose is less that these movies are profitable or useful. What you lose is the lessons that an industry can learn from things like this. In a perfect world, if In the Heights is a huge success at the box office, it spawns dozens of imitators. It spawns people saying, we can target an audience that has spending power and we'll go after them. Well, Warner Brothers could be 100% happy with how In the Heights did on HBO Max. And they could even tell you in totally nebulous, meaningless terms what its audience was. But there's no way that they're going to give enough data for anybody else to say this did well enough and we need to do more of this. And that is where the lack of numbers, in addition to just our general whining, because we do a lot of that, is of meaning. Because success breeds success. Success breeds imitators. Success breeds diversity of representation. And
success breeds opportunities for people who didn't get those opportunities before. I mean, look at what the success of a show like Blackish did, right? Would there have been a show like Fresh Off the Boat had Blackish not worked?
And so because we have the ratings, people can say that is a success we want to emulate. And unfortunately for everyone out there writing this is a disappointment because one metric isn't as good as we would like it to be, they're perpetuating the idea that this movie is a disappointment or a disaster, and they do not know. And that goes for us as a trade. It goes for anybody who's writing the why did In the Heights disappoint at the box office? Well, you don't know how it did on streaming, and that was not a small aspect of its rollout. So you don't know, and that becomes a problem because you don't know, it gets spun as a disappointment, it gets spun as a disaster, and that's where a problem of not having ratings comes in, is you simply can't emulate success, and thus, in the absence of verifiable success, you point to something as a failure when you really just don't know. And
see, it's damaging not giving us this data now.
It is.
Now it's damaging. You know, before we've been bitching and moaning about this since Netflix got into originals with Orange is the New Black and House of Cards. Now that feature films are doing it, the entire Hollywood ecosystem is now paying attention to something that TV reporters have been griping about for years. And now you're seeing with a movie like In the Heights, when you're getting this narrative, this unfair narrative, it's damaging. Give us the data. Give us the data.
Or we as a media need to have the restraint to not declare things failures when we really should be aware that we only have the smallest percentage of the information. We do not.
Even though cancellation stories and things underperforming and bad news always traffics better than good news, which is a sad remark on our culture.
Yeah, but and so honestly, maybe In the Heights is a disappointment. I don't know, because I don't have the data. And so I would never tell you it was a disappointment, because anecdotally, I only see people saying they love the movie, and so that doesn't seem to me like a disappointment. Yeah, you only have partial information, so don't treat partial information as if it's the end of the story.
Yes. And with that, let's go to our third segment.
Number 3.
Up next, Batman, according to DC, not a generous lover. Dan, I don't know how to really discuss this next topic, but I'll just say that this next segment is bananas. See what I did there? So
I don't know if I see what you did there, but I also don't know what we're going to discuss about this topic. On the other hand, it is bizarrely one of the most pervasive news stories of the week, and therefore, I guess we're going to talk about it.
Let's just call it a follow-up to our conversation last week with Michael Waldron about Vision's genitalia. So this week, Harley Quinn co-creator and co-showrunner Justin Halpern told THR sibling publication Variety that DC asked producers to not feature a scene in which Batman is going downtown on Catwoman. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Dan, because, yeah.
I don't know what I have to say on this subject, and I'm vaguely baffled by the spinning of the news story into, or the spinning of a joke into a news story wherein you have Val Kilmer weighing in. Sure, why not? I mean,
former Batman.
He did play Batman, so he's definitely one of my 6 to 10 favorite people who have played Batman, I think. So I'm totally into his opinion on things. No, I think it's funny because it is, look, I repeatedly mentioned Vision's genitals to Michael Waldron last week, but I really did have a point in it. And the point comes down to when you strip certain aspects of actual human behavior and existence out of superhero narratives, does that limit the way you're able to tell stories within them? So we were discussing with Michael Waldron the is Loki gender fluid, and what does that mean? And is it as simple as people going, oh, okay, well, he changes shape because he's a shapeshifter, and that's what superheroes or supervillains can sometimes do. And that's kind of a dead-ended version of the conversation. It's it's okay, great, he's got powers, and that's not interesting. Whereas for actual communities who are non-binary, gender fluid in our actual world, it's actually meaningful to see representation like that. So what does it mean? What does, is this something that can actually be done meaningfully? And so in Loki, is Loki gender fluid in a way that is actually meaningfully going to touch a community? That becomes a question. And the lack of sexuality in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and in the post-Netflix Marvel storytelling world, it's a thing of some interest. Now, does whether or not Batman will or will not perform cat cunnilingus, is that a thing that is a serious conversation that we need to be having? I don't have an answer to that, but boy, there were a lot of people taking it very seriously this week, and while I'm not sure if I approve of that, they were also making fun of DJ Khaled a lot, and I totally approve of that. So it's such a weird conversation, and there's no way that Justin and Patrick didn't think they were simply making a joke. But there are serious consequences to that. And is DC Comics prepared to be at the centerpiece of discussion of the importance of giving and taking in sexuality? And is our podcast prepared to be a part of that conversation? I don't know, but it's still a thing people are talking about on Twitter. And I get the feeling we're going to be making jokes about this on Twitter literally forever. And that is bizarre.
But in a larger sense,
go ahead, tie this in a larger sense, please, Leslie.
I mean, also, I just hear my wife going, "That's what she said," or title your sex tape in the background. So, it's kind of not surprising given the brand value that DC and Marvel have. And we should probably note that it's not the first time a comic book company has taken a more conservative approach with scripted originals. I mean, look at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Jeff Loeb era, where those Marvel TV shows that have all come and gone by now couldn't even connect to the features, let alone do anything that was remotely edgy. So, and then you had Powerless, which was DC's first live action scripted comedy that aired on NBC. It was a one and done, as I recall. But these companies don't want to push the envelope because these are multi-billion-dollar brands that are now being looked at to prop up and entire streaming services. And when you look at it that way, that's how much does Disney Plus have riding on Marvel? A ton. How much does HBO Max have riding on DC? A lot. So, it's interesting. And I did go back and I listened to our interview pegged to the debut of Harley Quinn on that service DC, when DC Universe used to have scripted originals. And we had Justin and Patrick on in episode 47 in November 2019. And they talked at length about working with DC on Powerless and how DC embraced edgy comedy. And then with Harley Quinn, they allowed them to present Batman as in their words, a grim asshole. And they talked a lot about how surprised they were that DC let them get away with things like representing Commissioner Gordon as a drunk. So there are things that DC is willing to do, just apparently there are limits to them.
They would do anything for love, but they won't do that. Yeah, no, it's all just strange. And Harley Quinn is a show that gets away with an awful lot. I mean, this is a show the rare show that I've actually gone back and rewatched in its entirety in the past couple of years. And I don't have the time to go back and listen to things, watch things multiple times. And I went back and rewatched Harley Quinn because it's so much fun. It's all about everyone has lines in semi-random places, and this is definitely a random place. You look at Marvel and you look at how generally sex and gender identity meaningless, the overall franchise is, and then you can have somebody in a Captain America suit bashing someone's face in with the Captain America shield and having it covered in blood. And that's apparently a thing that's not just acceptable, but it's a sign of how edgy and, controversial and whatever they're willing to be. These are all of the double standards that,
or Superman killing hundreds of people in the last Superman movie. Yeah.
Thousands. Superman has killed many people in Zack Snyder's conception of it. And so, why would the line that you would draw be Batman providing oral gratification for Catwoman and, again, Marvel and DC being different companies? They can do whatever they want, but DC has had no problems with deeply complex superheroes being responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of people. That's apparently okay. So, yeah, I don't know what else we have to say about this, but heaven knows it is a thing that blew up on Twitter, and Harley Quinn is a very, very funny show, whether or not Batman goes down.
Well, with no transition out of that, up next, it's our showrunner spotlight segment.
Number 4.
Our guest this week is Rafael Casal, co-star, showrunner, and co-creator, along with David Diggs, of Starz' Blindspotting. Casal and Diggs previously wrote the acclaimed feature version of Blindspotting, which was a Sundance favorite back in 2018. a competitive slam poet and recording artist, Casal's acting-only credits have recently included Bad Education and The Good Lord Bird. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Raphael. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, okay, with Blind Spotting, you and David spent a decade working on the script, and then you spent nearly a solid year promoting the movie between Sundance and theatrical. After all of that time, how hard was it setting the world of the movie behind, and then how much convincing did you require to decide it was okay to develop it for TV?
Convincing us to do it for television was near impossible, so bravo to the people that did. I think we eventually sort of talked ourselves into it. I don't know that we ever envisioned that Blind Spotting would be this thing that we would ever have to sort of contend with again. It was this very sort of self-contained story. I think we loved it and we're done with it. But we did, we had, as producers and as writers, we had regrets. We had things that we wish we could have done more of. And we think we had characters that we could have spent another few hours with. And all that sort of revealed itself during the process of making the movie. And so we really just sort of stemmed from a really honest question with David and I on our way to tell the network no and to stop asking. And that question was, well, is there any world where we would make this show? And the friend answer, the we love our friend Jasmine and wish that she would have a great vehicle answer was, I would go back and write a show for her at the, in a heartbeat. And we started to talk about what that would mean. We're like, well, we never got enough Ashley, and Ashley's such an interesting character, and people really gravitated towards her in the few scenes that she's in. And I had so many questions about her and Miles' relationship and her friends and how Sean happened and what their loyalty was like. And I think we just kind of spun out, probably stuck in traffic on the 405. And that traffic probably allowed us to talk a lot longer than we would have initially given that subject. And I think by the time we got there, we were like, okay, here's the only way this is going to happen. And we were like, it's got to star Jasmine Cephas Jones. We got to be able to do a lot of dance and a lot of verse stuff. And you can't tell us there's too much dance or too much verse. And they were just kind of like, if you're into it, we're into it. And I don't know why they were so willing. I think David was having a particularly good year. He was hot. He was hot. He was hot right now. And Jasmine is a fantastically interesting actor and artist, and I think they just got that. And I think the politics at Lionsgate was shifting, and I think they knew the politics at Starz was shifting, and they had a plan in their head that I don't know that we were fully aware of. And so they told us to go off and write, and we did. And we came up with this show that we love.
So when you mentioned the politics shifting at both Lionsgate and Starz, obviously that's now owned by the same company. But what, knowing now what you do, what was that conversation? What did they tell you? Like, this is what we're looking for. This is how we are evolving both the studio and this network.
Yeah, I don't know that we met with Lionsgate, and then we went out and we took it out to market, and Starz was the first place that we met. And because I think we had heard through the grapevine that Starz already knew about the show and really wanted it, and so we started there. But yeah, Lionsgate was definitely like, no, this is the kind of show that we would love to be a part of. And I think Starz, to a certain degree, said something similar. They're like, no, this is the kind of show that we're hoping to make. I want to be super clear. I don't have Starz. I just got Starz last week. I didn't have Starz then. I didn't know shit about their shows. I had some friends who watched Power. That was kind of it. And Lionsgate Television, it doesn't come up at the end of their TV show, so I didn't know their slate. I think it was in that meeting they were like, well, Rami is one of our shows. And I know Rami. I don't know him super, super well, but like when our movie got greenlit was the same day his TV show got greenlit. And we were together in Utah. And I remember that like joy of being like, I'm getting a TV show. And his came out pretty good. It did very well. And so I think that boded well for my trust in Lionsgate's ability to make a show where the creative freedom of the artist felt heard. And so that was really exciting. And then when we got to Stars, they told take the lead, all that shit that they're doing now. I literally just got off a call about sort of their initiatives, but none of that had been public yet. That was all still like an internal dialogue. And so they said, we're trying to have more content, that with women both in front and behind the camera, and more women of color, and we were like, okay, well, great, because we're gonna hire a ton of women, or at least we're gonna propose that, So I hope you understand that that's what's coming your way. And they had Catherine Adair, who was an executive there. It was after we did the whole tour of networks, was the only Black woman executive we saw. So, we went back to Stars and had another conversation with them, and we're like, look, this place feels right. We want to be really clear about the kind of show that we're trying to make, and they were on board. And so I think when you're shopping out something like that, you're just trying to find the place. You're trying to guess through the fog who's going to be the biggest pain in the ass, And we're like, right now it feels like Stars really likes us and won't be a big pain in the ass. So let's go with them.
I'm astounded that in your tour with this show, knowing from the start that this was going to focus on which character and what the storylines would be, that you only saw one Black executive after.
Yeah, there were definitely there were some other women of color executives, but I knew, because I know them, that they were junior executives and they didn't have greenlighting power. And that makes a difference. Like, I know when someone's being brought into the room to like make us feel more comfortable, or to like, to check off a box and be like, look who we have here and who actually is going to be in charge of the show. And when we realized that Catherine was actually going to be in charge of the show, that was the difference.
Well, now I'm curious. You talked about sort of your initial reticence to do this as a series. When it was being suggested to you, was it being suggested as kind of the Miles and Collins story and just an extension of the movie and not an expansion of the world? Did people just